My earliest memories aren't of bedtime stories or family picnics, they're of screaming matches and slammed doors. I'm Elsie, and for the first 8 years of my life, I watched my parents' marriage crumble one fight at a time. Dad always found something wrong with everything Mom did. The dinner was too salty. The laundry wasn't folded right. She spent too much money at the grocery store. She was teaching me bad habits. It didn't matter what she did, it was never good enough for him. "You're completely useless, Sarah," he would shout, his face red with anger. "Can't you do anything right?" I would hide in my room during these fights, pressing my hands against my ears, but their voices always found their way through the walls. After each fight, I'd hear Mom crying in the bathroom, trying to muffle her sobs with running water. The pattern continued year after year. Some days were better than others, but the tension was always there, like a storm waiting to break. Dad worked as a successful corporate lawyer, and he wielded his professional authority at home like a weapon. Mom was a stay-at-home mother who had given up her teaching career when I was born, something Dad never let her forget. "I provide everything for this family," he'd remind her during their arguments. "The least you could do is run a proper household." My 8th birthday was surprisingly peaceful. Dad even smiled a few times, and Mom made my favorite chocolate cake. Looking back now, I realize Mom must have already made her decision by then. The next morning, she was gone. No note, no goodbye, no explanation. Just empty drawers and a half-empty closet. Dad went ballistic, calling everyone we knew, hiring private investigators, but she had vanished completely. When the divorce proceedings started, she didn't show up to court. The judge granted Dad full custody and terminated her parental rights. I remember sitting in that courtroom, wearing the blue dress Mom had bought me just a month before, wondering if she would suddenly appear and explain everything. But she never did. Dad gripped my hand so tightly it hurt as we left the courthouse. "She's a traitor," he spat, his jaw clenched. "We don't need her. We never needed her." But I did need her. I needed my mom to protect me from Dad's temper, to braid my hair in the mornings, to tell me everything would be okay. Instead, I was left alone with a father whose anger now had no other target but me. That's when Dad decided to hire a nanny. "I can't work and take care of a child," he announced one evening. "We need help around here." Enter Maria Chen, young, pretty, and at first, seemingly perfect. She was 26, had a degree in early childhood education, and made the best chocolate chip cookies I'd ever tasted. When she started working for us, I thought things might finally get better. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. Dad and Maria would exchange these weird little smiles when they thought I wasn't looking. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and they'd suddenly stop talking, like teenagers caught passing notes in class. Maria started staying later and later after Dad got home from work, and they'd sit in the kitchen talking in low voices. One evening in October, about 6 months after Maria started working for us, Dad called me into his study. Maria was there too, standing next to his desk with this huge smile on her face. "Elsie," Dad said, actually looking happy for the first time since Mom left, "I have something important to tell you. Maria and I are getting married." I remember feeling relieved, honestly. Maria had been so good to me. She helped me with my homework, made my favorite pasta dishes, and never yelled like Dad did. When I had nightmares, she'd sit with me and tell me stories until I fell back asleep. Maybe this was our chance at being a real family again. "That's great," I said, and I meant it. Maria hugged me, and her perfume smelled like vanilla and flowers. "We'll be so happy together," she promised. "You'll see." The wedding was small but elegant. I was the flower girl, wearing a pink dress that Maria helped me pick out. She looked beautiful in her white gown, and Dad couldn't stop smiling. That was the last day I saw the Maria I knew. It started small. The day after they got back from their honeymoon, I left my backpack in the living room like I always did. Maria walked in, saw it, and her whole face changed. "Pick that up immediately," she snapped. "This isn't a pigsty." I was shocked. Maria had never spoken to me like that before. But that was just the beginning. Suddenly, everything I did was wrong. My bed wasn't made properly. I was too loud when I walked. I didn't say please and thank you enough times. One day, confused and hurt by her complete transformation, I worked up the courage to ask her directly, "Why are you so different now? You used to be so nice to me." Maria laughed, not the warm laugh I remembered, but something cold and sharp. "Oh, sweetie," she said, examining her perfectly manicured nails, "before, I was just an employee. Now I'm the lady of this house, and you need to learn your place. When I tell you to do something, you do it. No questions asked." I ran to Dad's study that evening, tears streaming down my face, and told him everything. I thought he would protect me, set things right. Instead, his face turned that dangerous shade of red I remembered from his fights with Mom. "You're just like your mother," he snarled, slamming his hand on the desk. "Always complaining, always causing problems. Let me make something very clear. If I hear you saying one more word against Maria to anyone, you'll be very, very sorry. Do you understand me?" I nodded, my whole body shaking, and fled to my room. That night, I cried into my pillow until it was soaked through, wishing desperately for Mom to come back and save me. Life became a minefield of new rules and restrictions. Maria wielded her authority like a weapon, finding new ways to make my life miserable every day. First, she banned my favorite pop music because it was too vulgar. Then she took away the small TV in my room, claiming it was distracting me from my studies, even though I had straight A's. She started controlling what I wore, throwing out my favorite jeans because they were too casual. My colorful bedspread was replaced with plain white sheets because my room needed to match the house aesthetic. She even scheduled my shower times, no longer than 10 minutes, and only at specific hours she approved. The only light in this darkness was Grandma Helen, Mom's mother. She visited every few weeks, always bringing me something special, books, clothes, or little pieces of jewelry that Maria couldn't justify taking away because they were family gifts. "How are you doing, sweetheart?" Grandma would ask during her visits, her eyes searching my face for the truth. I'd feel Dad's and Maria's eyes on me, remember Dad's threat, and force a smile. "I'm fine, Grandma, everything's great." This went on for 3 years. I learned to live by Maria's rules, to stay quiet, to be invisible. Then, when I was 13, Maria announced she was pregnant. Dad was ecstatic. He started converting the guest room into a nursery before she was even showing. Maria spent hours looking at baby clothes and designing the perfect room for their precious daughter. When little Sophie was born, it was like I ceased to exist entirely. Dad took photos of everything she did, her first smile, her first attempt to roll over, her first grab at a toy. Maria posted hourly updates on social media about her perfect little angel. But 6 months into their parental bliss, Maria started complaining. "I'm so exhausted," she'd whine to Dad. "The baby needs constant attention. I can't even get my nails done anymore." Dad, ever the problem solver, suggested hiring a babysitter. "There are plenty of qualified college students looking for work," he said one evening over dinner. "We could interview some." I watched Maria's face twist into a grimace at the mention of college students. Her hand tightened around her fork, and I could practically read her thoughts. After all, wasn't that exactly how she'd gotten her position in this house? A young, pretty student nanny who ended up becoming the wife? The irony wasn't lost on me, even at 13. "Absolutely not," Maria cut him off, her fork clattering against her plate. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at me across the table. "We don't need to hire anyone. We have a perfectly capable babysitter right here." Dad followed her gaze and nodded slowly. "You're right. Elsie can help out with Sophie. It'll be good for her to learn some responsibility." What started as helping out quickly turned into full-time, unpaid childcare. Every day after school, Maria would be waiting by the door, Sophie already in her arms. The moment I stepped inside, she'd practically throw the baby at me. "She's been fed, but she'll need changing soon," Maria would say, already grabbing her designer purse. "I have an appointment at the salon," or "I'm meeting the girls for coffee," or whatever excuse she had that day. I loved Sophie. She was an innocent baby who didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of all this. But I was 14, trying to maintain my grades while essentially becoming a full-time nanny. Instead of doing my algebra homework, I was warming bottles and making baby food. Rather than working on my history project, I was changing diapers and singing lullabies. Maria would breeze in around 6:30, just before Dad got home, carrying takeout containers from expensive restaurants. "I'm exhausted from cooking all day," she'd announce as Dad walked in, setting the food on the table. I'd be there, still in my school uniform, Sophie on my hip, homework untouched. One day at school, I couldn't take it anymore. During lunch, I broke down and told my friend Amanda everything, about being forced to watch Sophie every day, about not having time for homework, about Maria's lies to Dad. "That's not right," Amanda said, her face serious. "My mom works for Child Protective Services. This is exactly the kind of thing she deals with. I should have known better than to trust anyone." 2 days later, I was home with Sophie, trying to simultaneously feed her strained peas and read my English assignment, when there was a knock at the door. 3 people in professional attire introduced themselves as representatives from CPS. They asked where Maria was. I told the truth, at her weekly spa appointment. They looked around the house, took notes, asked me questions about my daily routine. Then they called my father. Dad arrived 20 minutes later, his face a mask of calm that didn't reach his eyes. I knew that look. It was the same one he used to wear before his worst fights with Mom. The CPS workers explained their concerns about leaving a 14-year-old in charge of an infant for extended periods. They issued a formal warning about negligent supervision and left their card. The moment their car pulled away, Dad exploded. "You treacherous little snake," he roared, his face purple with rage. "Just like your mother, always trying to destroy this family. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I didn't mean to," I started, but he cut me off. "Shut up. You're exactly like her, a traitor. You betrayed this family, betrayed Maria's trust." Maria came home then, her hair freshly styled, nails gleaming. Dad told her everything, but remarkably, his anger never touched her. Instead, she burst into tears, claiming I was trying to ruin her life, that I was jealous of her relationship with Sophie, that I was ungrateful for everything they'd done for me. "Go to your room," Dad bellowed. "No phone, no computer, no leaving the house except for school for the next month. And if you ever pull something like this again." He didn't finish the threat. He didn't need to. A week after the CPS incident, I waited until Dad and Maria were asleep, then crept downstairs with my phone that they'd forgotten to take away. My hands were shaking as I dialed Grandma Helen's number. "Grandma?" I whispered when she answered. "I need help." My voice broke as I told her everything, the forced babysitting, the neglect, Dad's rage, the punishment. She listened quietly, only occasionally making soft sounds of distress. "I'll be there tomorrow morning," she said firmly. "Pack a bag, sweetheart, just in case." True to her word, Grandma Helen arrived at 9 a.m. sharp the next day. She wasn't her usual diplomatic self. She stormed into the house like an avenging angel, her normally perfect hair slightly disheveled, her eyes blazing. "I've watched this situation long enough," she announced to Dad and Maria in our living room. "I know everything, how you've turned my granddaughter into an unpaid servant, how you've been neglecting her education, how you punish her for speaking the truth." Dad started to protest, but Grandma cut him off. "I'm taking Elsie to live with me. You can either agree to this amicably, or we can let a judge decide after I show them the evidence I've been collecting." "You can't just take her," Dad spluttered, but I noticed Maria's expression shift. She touched Dad's arm gently. "Maybe," she said softly, "maybe it would be better for everyone. We could focus on Sophie, and Elsie would have more opportunities with Helen." I could see the wheels turning in Dad's head as Maria continued to whisper persuasively in his ear. Within an hour, he agreed to let me go. Grandma's house, or rather, mansion, was like something out of a dream. Located in the wealthy part of town, it had a sweeping driveway, manicured gardens, and more rooms than I could count. My bedroom was bigger than our entire living room at Dad's house, with a window seat overlooking the rose garden. "This is your home now," Grandma said, helping me unpack. "You can decorate it however you like." I transferred to Winchester Prep, where I quickly made real friends for the first time in years. No one there knew my history, and I could just be myself, not the unwanted stepdaughter, not the unpaid babysitter, just Elsie. On my 16th birthday, Grandma called me into her study. She was sitting behind her antique desk, looking more serious than usual. "I've set up a college fund for you," she announced. "It should cover tuition at any university you choose, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, wherever you want to go." That night, I stayed up late studying for my AP biology test. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just studying to escape my reality, I was studying for my future. I found the photo album by accident while helping Grandma reorganize her office a month after the conversation about college. It was leather-bound, tucked away on a high shelf, behind some financial records. When I opened it, my mother's face stared back at me, younger, happier, in pictures I'd never seen before. My heart started racing as I flipped through the pages. There she was at my age, then at her high school graduation, then at what looked like her college years. She looked so much like me, it was startling. The same dark hair, the same smile, even the same way of tilting her head in photos. "Grandma," I called out, my voice trembling with sudden hope. "Look what I found." Grandma came into the office and froze when she saw what I was holding. "We should contact her," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "Now that I'm living with you, Dad can't stop her from seeing me anymore. She doesn't have to be afraid of him. We could." "Elsie," Grandma interrupted softly, and something in her tone made my stomach drop. "There's something you need to know." She walked to her desk and opened her laptop, clicking through folders until she found what she was looking for. "I should have told you this sooner, but I was trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Grandma took a deep breath. "The day after your mother left, I emailed her. I knew where she was, she'd contacted me briefly before leaving. I told her she needed to come back for you, that she couldn't leave you with your father. I promised to help her financially, to support both of you, to do whatever was necessary to keep you both safe." My hands were shaking now. What did she say?" Instead of answering, Grandma turned the laptop toward me. The email was dated one day after Mom left, and it was short. "Mom, don't contact me about Elsie again. I don't want her. I never have. I never loved her, she was just a chain keeping me tied to that house, to that life. I don't care what happens to her. She's Robert's problem now. Sarah." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I read it again, and again, trying to make them say something different. But they remained the same, cold, cruel, final. "I saved it," Grandma said quietly. "I thought someday you might need to know the truth." I closed the photo album slowly, my mother's smiling face suddenly seeming like a mockery. All these years, I'd imagined her forced away by Dad's cruelty, too afraid to contact me, perhaps watching me from afar and loving me in secret. But the truth was simpler and far more brutal, she'd never wanted me at all. The next 2 years were the happiest of my life. I got accepted to Princeton with a perfect GPA and spent my weekdays immersed in my studies, making new friends, and building a life for myself. Every weekend, I'd call Grandma Helen, and during holidays and vacations, I'd return home to her. "Tell me everything," she'd say as we shared tea in her garden, and I'd talk for hours about my classes, my friends, my dreams for the future. Then, halfway through my sophomore year, Grandma got sick. It started with what seemed like a simple cold, but quickly turned into something much worse. The doctors discovered stage 4 lung cancer, already spread throughout her body. They gave her 6 months. She fought hard, never losing her dignity or her sharp wit, but the doctors were right. I spent that summer break by her bedside, watching her slip away. She died on a quiet Tuesday morning in August, holding my hand and telling me how proud she was of me. The funeral was well attended. Grandma Helen had been a pillar of the community, and people came from all over to pay their respects. Business associates, charity board members, friends from her social clubs, distant relatives I barely knew, they all came to say goodbye. But 3 people were conspicuously absent: my mother, my father, and Maria. Not that I expected them to come, but their absence felt like one final confirmation of how completely they'd cut themselves out of our lives. 2 weeks after the funeral, I received a call from Mr. Patterson, Grandma's notary, asking me to come to his office for the reading of the will. When I arrived, I found someone I hadn't seen in over a decade: my mother. She was with a man who looked about 5 years younger than her, dressed in an expensive but ill-fitting suit. She barely glanced at me when I walked in, though I caught her checking her watch repeatedly as she urged Mr. Patterson to get on with it. The reading itself was brief but devastating, at least for her. Grandma had left me her house, all her jewelry, and the bulk of her fortune, $700,000. My mother received $100,000 and nothing else. This can't be right, my mother burst out, her composure finally cracking. Tears streamed down her face, smearing her perfect makeup. I'm her daughter. I have debts to pay. I need that money. The younger man with her shifted uncomfortably in his chair as she continued to sob and plead, claiming she was entitled to more, that it wasn't fair, that she needed help. I stood up without a word and walked out, her cries following me down the hallway. The next morning, I was in Grandma's study, my study now, sorting through decades of documents. The doorbell rang around noon. When I opened the door, my mother stood there, wearing a different designer outfit than yesterday, but the same desperate expression. She walked past me into the foyer, her eyes drinking in every detail of the house. Oh, it's exactly as I remember it. I grew up here, you know. That chip in the marble by the stairs? That's from when I was 7 and dropped my roller skates. Why are you here? I asked, closing the door but not moving from it. She ran her hand along the banister. I miss this place, miss you. We have so much catching up to do, don't you think? Mother and daughter, finally reunited. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. 12 years. It took you 12 years to miss me? I know I made mistakes, she said, her voice taking on a pleading tone. I was young, trapped in a horrible marriage with your father. I wasn't thinking clearly. She moved into the living room, settling onto the couch as if she belonged there. Actually, sweetie, I was hoping we could help each other out. I'm in a bit of a financial bind right now, and this house is so big for just one person. No, I said firmly. You can't live here. Not now, not ever. Her face changed then, the mask of maternal affection slipping. I'm your mother, Elsie, you can't just throw me out on the street. I gave birth to you. And then you abandoned me, I replied, my voice steady. You left me with a father you knew was toxic. You never called, never wrote, never checked if I was okay. She paled slightly but recovered quickly. You don't understand how complicated adult relationships are. If you turn your back on me now, I'll make sure everyone knows what a cruel, heartless daughter you are. I'll tell them how you're leaving your own mother homeless. I walked to the study, retrieved my laptop, and returned. Go ahead, tell everyone. And I'll show them this. I opened the saved email, the one Grandma had kept all these years. I don't want her. I never have. I never loved her, I read aloud. She's Robert's problem now. Should I forward this to all those society friends you're so worried about? Post it on social media maybe? The color drained from her face completely. She stood up, grabbing her designer purse. You're just like your father, cruel and manipulative. No, I said calmly. I'm like my grandmother, I see through your act, and I keep receipts. She fled the house in a rage, the door slamming behind her. That was 6 months ago. I'm graduating from Princeton next month, with honors in business administration. I've already accepted a job offer at a consulting firm in town, and in July, I'll move back into Grandma's house permanently. My house now. Dad tried to call once, probably after hearing about the inheritance from my mother. I didn't answer. Maria still posts perfect family photos with Sophie on social media. I blocked her account. My mother occasionally sends manipulative texts about forgiveness and family obligations. I blocked her number too. Some people say you can't choose your family, but I disagree. Grandma chose me when my own parents wouldn't, and that's the legacy I'm choosing to honor. I'm having the house renovated next month, updating it while keeping all the things that made it special to Grandma. Yesterday, I found a letter Grandma had written to me before she died, tucked away in her desk drawer. Remember, she wrote, your worth isn't determined by those who left, but by how you choose to move forward. You are stronger than you know, smarter than you believe, and more loved than you can imagine. She was right. The past is the past, and I'm done letting it define my future.